Good afternoon, and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions, brought to you by the Labyrinth Society and with your host, Christiana Brinton. Today, I am speaking with Dr. Gary Boelhower and Gary Anderson, who together have created a method of accessing one's inner wisdom through journaling and tracing the path of the labyrinth. If you are joining us on this GoToMeeting session, please mute your sound by clicking on the microphone icon in the upper left of the GoToMeeting control panel that will appear on your computer screen once you log in. If you call in by phone, you will not see this panel. You can unmute yourselves and ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the interview. Find the GoToMeeting invitation posted on the TLS Facebook page, the TLS Facebook Global Group, and on the TLS website under Media. You have to go under Resources, then Media, and then click on the Many Paths, Many Vision link, and then you'll see it in there. So this episode is entitled Mountain 10, Climbing the Labyrinth Within, which is also the title of the book written by Dr. Gary. I'm going to call him Dr. Gary and Gary Anderson, just plain Gary, so that we can distinguish the two from now on. So this book was written by Dr. Gary and his colleagues, Joe Miguez and Tricia Pierce. Dr. Gary Boelhower is a professor emeritus in theology and religious studies at the College of St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota, where he continues to teach about ethics, values, leadership, and wise decision-making on both the undergraduate and graduate levels. He is an author. Gary is an author, poet, and workshop presenter who has written several books of poetry and wise decision-making, and one book specifically about the process being explored in this podcast. Gary Anderson is a certified yoga and Phoenix Rising instructor who has brought mindfulness therapy to the city of Duluth in his role as city councilor, community organizer, and as one of the leaders of the 2012-2013 Marriage Equality Minnesotans United for All Families campaign. Greetings, Dr. Gary, and Gary, welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Christiana, for having us. It is a real pleasure to be with you and to explore this accessing inner wisdom, which all of us need.
And it's a very good to be here with you today, Christiana.
It's so great that the two of you have very distinct voices, so I can easily tell you apart. So this will be fun, and I am so I'm so glad you're on Many Paths, Many Visions with me today. Wasn't able to be in attendance at your workshop at the 2018 gathering. So I'm really looking forward to learning about this methodology that you've created. But first, let's give our listeners a little background information. How did you each find labyrinths? Or how did they find you, the labyrinth and the labyrinth community? And then how did this lead you both to combine your interests into a workshop?
So let me start. I've been walking labyrinths and tracing labyrinths probably for about 20 years. And at one of the workshops that I was at, I had the opportunity to meet Joe Miguez, who was leading a labyrinth workshop as well. And I think this was at the Center for Creative Leadership. And we were both doing workshops separately. And I went to his workshop, he went to my workshop. And we said, there are ways in which we could put these sorts of things together. Joe Miguez, of course, was one of the founders, actually, of the Labyrinth Society, and had been working with individuals and organizations for many years before I met him. And so he sort of rekindled my interest in labyrinths and my labyrinth practice. And soon after that, we had a chance to have a longer conversation about the possibility of writing what became this book, Mountain 10, Climbing the Labyrinth Within. Many years after that, I married my spouse, Gary Anderson, and we took this book, Mountain 10, Climbing the Labyrinth Within, and worked it up into a workshop that we give primarily in the Midwest, but also in other places. And it is a workshop that uses the technology of the labyrinth and the human change process. And Gary is able to bring his background in yoga and in mindfulness and yoga therapy. And I'm able to bring my own background in ethical decision-making, moral decision-making, and discernment processes. And together we really have a lot of fun and really feel a tremendous honor to be presenting this and facilitating this process for people who come to the workshops. I'll let Gary say a little bit about his labyrinth introduction.
Thank you. Yeah, while Gary and Joe and Trish were writing the Mountain 10 book, which took place primarily over conference calls over a couple of years, I observed that process from the other room while I heard Gary and them on the phone. And it was really during that time that I actually started paying attention to what they were doing, and also started then, around that time, started walking one of the two labyrinths that are within walking distance of our home here in Duluth, Minnesota. So we're really fortunate in that way that half a mile in one direction is a little labyrinth at a retreat center that's it's mown into the grass by Sister Terry, a local Benedictine nun, and it's been there for many years. And then there's also in a cemetery about a mile in the opposite direction from our home is a labyrinth that was laid down by the former caretaker of that cemetery. And so it's been a really fascinating thing to learn about labyrinths by walking them, and then also to really go into depth by sharing the Mountain 10 process. So it's one of the amazing things about doing this workshop that Gary and I do is that to varying degrees, we get to experience the benefits of the work even as we're leading the workshops. So it's a wonderful thing.
Well, what I have never thought of putting a labyrinth in a cemetery. I have to turn out. When you said that, I was, I wonder if the spirits walk it when they're not in the ground, at All Hallows Eve or something. How intriguing that is. I wonder if we had a Carillion camera, you could see something. Anyway, my mind went off in another whole direction, even though I was paying attention. But so great. Thank you for sharing that little lead into this, because I think that's important to sort of set up a foundation. A lot of people don't know you well, maybe don't know you well, and so this is always helpful. So, and I love what you're saying is that you get as much benefit as the participants in your workshops. I think that is, we can come back to that, but let's talk about, let's first talk about the title of your workshop, because I find that really intriguing. Why do you call your process Mountain 10 as opposed to 3 or 7 or 9 or another number? Why Mountain 10? And why use the labyrinth in this process?
So we use, first of all, the metaphor of mountain climbing. It's Mountain 10, and climbing the labyrinth within. We don't often say that we're climbing a labyrinth. We usually walk a labyrinth, or we trace a labyrinth, or we color a labyrinth, but we don't often say we're climbing a labyrinth. But we wanted to use the metaphor of mountain climbing because it denotes the adventure that is really part of going into our own inner wisdom, experiencing the diverse geography of our inner being, our inner self. That's not easy work. It's difficult work. It's adventurous work. It is work that requires a particular kind of close attentiveness and awareness of our inner surroundings, an observation of our feelings and our bodily sensations and our mental images and our soulful longings. So Mountain 10 is this idea of climbing our own wisdom, getting in touch with our own inner teacher in that difficult process of being attentive to the voice within, to the complex geography that each of us is on the inside. Now, we use Mountain 10 because 10 is in our decimal system the first perfect number. So it's the first number that kind of symbolizes completeness, a 10. We often have a grading criteria or a judging criteria from 1 to 10. 10 denotes a kind of completeness, fullness, sense of perfection. And by the way, Mountain 10 also is about the 10th turn in the labyrinth experience, where we ask people to pause and reflect on how far they've come, where they still have to go if they're going to go to the center or to the summit of their own experience. And over many years, Joe and Tricia particularly observed people sort of naturally pausing at this point in the labyrinth walking process. So in the 10th major turn, it seems to be a kind of natural place for people to pause a little bit. They've been on the journey for a while. And the 10th turn is an opportunity to kind of take stock of where we're at, and if we want to push on to the summit, to the center. So I'll end there. Let Gary add anything else that he might want to about this.
So why do we use the labyrinth is the piece of the question that I wanted to reflect on, which is that, the labyrinth provides us, whether it's a finger labyrinth or tracing a labyrinth or coloring a labyrinth or walking a labyrinth, it's an opportunity for embodiment. And when we are embodied, we access not only the wisdom of our brain, but we are able to access the wisdom of our full body mind. What's happening in our gut? What's happening in our heart? What are we feeling in our throats? What kind of burdens are we carrying on our shoulders? And so utilizing the movement of the labyrinth invites us into deep embodiment and therefore deeper wisdom.
And of course, the labyrinth has been such an amazing tool for generations and generations and generations of people. We know it's at least 6,000 years old, probably older than that. We find it across the world and all kinds of cultures. And so it is a tried and tested way of deep reflection, of centering, of getting in touch with our own inner wisdom. And so what we do in the Mountain 10 process is we combine the labyrinth action, the labyrinth, we don't walk it, but we trace it, and the human change process. And so what we've done is really, in a sense, scored the labyrinth into quarters and identified the 4 terrains of the human change process. And this is, again, a very simple way of looking at human change, but it's a very, very important way of understanding the change process. First of all, we begin with observation. All human change begins with either the realization that something isn't working, that something is painful, that something's not right, that something doesn't fit anymore, or the awareness that I'm being called beyond where I am right now, that there's something attracting me, that there's something luring me, pulling me. I have a longing for something more or something greater or something different. So the human change process begins with this kind of awareness, either positive or negative. And then if we're going to make any kind of change, we have to let go. We have to, in order to do something different, we have to let go of the way we've done it before. And the letting go process is often a difficult part of the human change process. It's an emotional part of the human change process because we get in ruts. We have routines, and those routines provide comfort. They provide a sense of normality or normalcy in our life. And so to let go of something is often a difficult thing. Gary, I'll let you talk about the other 2 terrains, vision and realization.
Well, before we start,
Yeah,
before we go further,
okay.
Before we go further, I have to ask a couple of questions here. Getting back to first of all, the image of climbing a mountain. It was so vivid to me when you said that. I was like, oh, so but this isn't like Jacob's ladder as opposed to Leah's circle or anything like that. What you said, Gary Anderson, the idea that of walking the labyrinth helps you embody the process, and you cannot be disembodied when you are climbing mountains. You will fall off the edge and kill yourself. So
That's it.
that's very interesting, that you talk about this, because I have had that experience going on very, very narrow paths, ledges, looking straight down and going, OMG, I'm going to get sick. It's making me dizzy, kind of thing. Just please let me go forward to the next bend or the boulder and get into more solid ground. So it's a wonderful, to me, vision or a metaphor for this, because you can't afford not to be embodied when you're in this process. But so often we sort of fall into these. Now you're talking about I think the process you're talking about, the 4 terrains of exploration, which is what you started talking about, Dr. Gary, is that, and sometimes we sort of fall into this and don't realize that we really have to be attentive. We have to be, and many of the times we're not ready to, we have too many assaults going on in our lives and everything else. Well, you can talk about this some more, but I just wanted to point to that I thought that image was like immediate for me. Like, oh yes, I get what you're talking about here. That's a powerful visual image that you provide with that. And also, I also wanted, so are you now speaking about the design that is the typical sharp design because it already is broken up into quadrants that you use for your walking for finger labyrinths, or do you use which design do you normally use for this
Yes,
class?
we use the 11 circuit chart
Okay.
labyrinth design, or
Okay.
something. It's based on the 11 circuit chart labyrinth design.
Okay,
Yes,
so that 10th turn, that is what you're talking about, is one is the at the Labrys's, one of the 10th one, and I'll have to look
correct.
and see which one it is, but yeah, so that's what you're talking about. Okay, great. So now keep going, Gary Anderson, and talk about the other two terrains of exploration. If you
Sure. So Dr. Gary spoke of awareness and letting go. And once we have spent some time observing our inner terrain and noticing some of the things that we need to let go of, when we create new space, then very often, if not always, some new vision starts to appear to us. If I'm going to let go of a work situation that's no longer serving me, or a relationship that's no longer serving me, it seems the nature abhors a vacuum. So a vision of some new reality comes into place. And so we move back and forth through into the vision quadrant, which is the upper right quadrant of the Mountain 10 graphic. And of course, once we have vision, when we listen to our wisdom, then the next thing that comes is that steps toward creating that vision, creating reality out of that vision, come to us. And we create simple, doable plans, if you will. What are the next steps for actually seeing this change happen in our day-to-day lives? And as to go back to that, that mountain image, Christiana, when we're climbing a mountain, actually the most dangerous time for mountain climbers is not when they are going up, it's on their return journey. That's where the most deaths and accidents happen. So it's really interesting in using this mountain 10 metaphor around a labyrinth. So as we go through this process of exploring these terrains of awareness, letting go, vision, and realization, we encourage all the participants in our workshop to really be mindful that they need to give as much attention, if not more attention, to their return journey out of the labyrinth, so that they can arrive back safely in their day-to-day lives.
Mm. Mm.
Now, one of the greatest wisdoms, of course, about the labyrinth is it's an iterative process, right? That takes us close to the center and then back out again and then in and out. And the same is true of the exploring these four terrains or these four dimensions of the human change process. So we're sort of presenting it here in a linear fashion, but the Mountain 10 process or technology is actually a labyrinth process that takes us, into letting go, back into observation, into vision, back into letting go, into realization, back into observation. And as we revisit those terrains, each time there is often a greater depth of observation, a greater realization of what needs to be let go of. New aspects to the vision arise. More concrete steps we become aware of, and so this is an iterative process, just as the labyrinth process is, and that's an important part of the technology.
And I think it's also okay. I just got so many questions here. I'm not really sure where to start, but I want to stick to this exploration of this process first before I start asking questions. So in terms of the actual class itself, how does this labyrinth process differ from the traditional walk through a labyrinth, or how do you break it up in the workshop itself, such that you give people time to uh, absorb, to sink into what they're experiencing, to journal or whatever else, to be mindful, to be embodied?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we begin first with an embodiment process where we kind of check in with the dimensions of who we are physically. Maybe Gary, you would want to lead us in that just very briefly.
Sure, and so if you just sit and feel your feet on the earth and take a breath into your relationship of your body, feel the feet on the earth, and feel your backside sitting on the chair. And notice the breath in the body. And moving with the breath, we notice our major joints in our feet, our knees and our hips, and we acknowledge how we benefit from flexibility in our lives. We notice how our legs, our feet, our hips help us move through the world with grace and with ease, help us climb, if you will. And as we move, we're also aware of the energy of our bellies. What does our gut tell us about what we are doing in our lives? What's the energy that we receive, the messages that we receive from our heart, and how our heart reacts to where we are in the moment. And we notice also what's happening with the shoulders. What are the burdens that we are carrying? What is there that we might be able to let go of in the moment that will allow us to be freer as we do our Mountain 10 journey? We notice the energy of the throat and how it is that we are communicating, hearing, and speaking with those around us and with our own inner wisdom. We also, of course, are deeply aware of the intuitive sense, that third eye. So when we begin the Mountain 10 process, we spend time moving our bodies, sensing our bodies, and of course, most often we are leading workshops. So we might have 10 or 15 people in a room, and we're all moving and feeling and absorbing the experience of our own bodies in ways that's appropriate for us in the moment. And as we become embodied, then we start to reflect on the question what's the question that we want to explore in our time together? And we simply ask,
We ask each individual to identify an intention for their walk, for their Mountain 10 journey.
Yeah, and we ask the question, what do you really want? What do you really want? And we take a few minutes actually, to let folks simply write a response to that answer. And this intention serves as their starting off point for their labyrinth journey. And we always realize that the intention may change over the time of that they're working actually on their coloring in of the labyrinth. And we have a beautiful lab graphic that we use, and we start off coloring it in with the color red, which symbolizes our connection to the earth. And we spend almost actually more than half of the labyrinth is colored in with this red. And along the way, we stop at what we call waypoints. And there's waypoints in each of the 4 quadrants. And with each of those waypoints, we encourage folks to take a pause and write, what are you aware of in this moment? What is your gut telling you that you might need to let go of? What's the vision that's starting to appear? How will that vision become real? So we do this coloring process of the Mountain 10 lab graphic, and we answer questions along the way. And we usually take, most often it's around a 45-minute process of doing this coloring and reflecting on questions along the way.
So people, yep, go ahead.
I was just wondering. So I'm trying to get a visual of this workshop in the room with you're not actually are you walking a full size labyrinth, a canvas labyrinth on the floor, or tape labyrinth, or this is just what they have in their hand
Right,
on their labs?
we're not walking a labyrinth.
Okay.
They have a lab graphic,
Okay.
which they are coloring.
Got it. Okay. All right.
So, and that lab graphic not only has the labyrinth path, but at various points along the labyrinth path are these waypoints. And so they as they get to the waypoints, they recognize what waypoint is in what quadrant. So if the waypoint is in the letting go quadrant, then they're asked to journal a little bit on what's coming to you about letting go. What do you need to let go of? What might you be able to offload in your life? Are there some expectations that other people have laid on you that maybe you no longer need to live up to? So all of those questions around letting go. If that waypoint is in the awareness quadrant, then it's simply a question of what are you aware of? What's your body saying to you? What images are coming up for you? What memories are occurring? Anything like that. So what are you aware of? If the waypoint is in the vision quadrant, then pay attention to what vision might be coming. Are there any hints and guesses to where you want to go, what your next step is, what that lure is in your life? And if the waypoint is in the realization quadrant, then the question is, what are those individual steps that you need to take in order to make the vision become real? What are the concrete ways you move toward that new vision? So again, this is an iterative process. So they're moving through the labyrinth. There are waypoints along the way in each of these 4 quadrants. So they're journaling throughout the labyrinth journey, just coloring the path, getting to the waypoint, coloring in the waypoint, noticing what quadrant it's in, journaling just a little bit on the question of that quadrant. Now, the amazing thing is, after we've done this with a couple of hundred people now in workshops, and we've done it ourselves many, many, many times, is the process deepens as you go along the way. And it seems such a simple process, but it is a very deep inner wisdom that we connect with in that process.
Well, and this is because I would have to say, from what you're telling me, I mean, I don't have a visual of this, of the design, but I've done plenty of finger labyrinths and painted them and colored them and everything. So I get a sense of what you're talking about. But it would seem to me, if you have these quadrants in front of you and you're taking great care to remain embodied in, and I love Gary Anderson. I love what you said about the way you get people embodied is going through the chakra, a very organic way of going up through the chakras, aligning the chakras with the colors and bringing them up so that they really get clear about each area of their body and bring it all into alignment down the spine. So I like that. I love that. It's probably very effective. But in terms of what I was getting at is that you have these quadrants and you're going inward. And as you said, Dr. Gary, that it doesn't happen section by section, people go back to the last, go on to the next one, etc. But you get to the center now. So here you are in the center, and you talked about that as a summit, but then you have the whole process of return, which then goes through the quadrants again. So I'm assuming that this is what you mean by it gets deeper and deeper, because you have that whole return, and so there often you go back through these quadrants again and revisit, and other things come to them. Correct, as you're in that.
Correct. That's right. And then, and we asked people to, take a few deep breaths in the center and a little pause and just appreciate the journey that they've been through, appreciate the insights that they've come to. And then they make their way out. And as Gary said, it's important to do that with attention as well, that as you're making your way down the mountain, you're also careful, you're also attentive, you continue to be attentive to the climb down. And then when you complete your journey, we ask people to reflect on a number of questions, like what no longer brings you joy or takes you away from your source? What do you choose to let go of? What brings you joy and is in alignment with your source? What do you choose to keep? What do you choose to add to keep your source fueled? Support systems, skills? What do you choose to do differently? And then finally, what did you learn? Any surprises? What are your next steps on the way of wisdom? So people have an opportunity to do some final journaling, and then we move them into triads usually and do a clearness process. This is from the Quaker tradition. Parker Palmer has been very instrumental in helping people use this in small group situations. And in a clearness process, each person gets to talk as much as they would like in a certain time frame about their experience, and the other people in the triad, the other two people in the triad, only ask questions. They don't give any advice, they don't make any recommendations, they don't talk about their own experience. They only ask open-ended questions to help the individual move even more deeply into their own inner wisdom. And so this is an important sort of second part of the workshop experience. We've prepared them sort of with a holistic awareness, and then they trace the labyrinth, stopping at these waypoints, identifying the four quadrants, doing a little bit of journaling. Then they have the opportunity to answer some significant journal questions about their whole process. And then we move them into small groups where they have the opportunity to hear from others a question or two that might help them go even more deeply into listening to the inner teacher within.
Yeah, that just sounds like a wonderful workshop. Next time you give this, I'm going to be there. Now, I don't know where I'm normally not in your area of the country, but it just sounds fabulous. So I have plenty of questions, but what I want to know is, are you, this is for the research academics out there, academia needs to know this. So, normally methodologies require some level of statistical evidence before they can be admitted into common practice, especially in academia. So is this your desire to have this process become a standard praxis in psychology or psychiatry therapy? And if so, what are some of the results your participants have experienced? Because you have to have some kind of results that you have statistical evidence that gives credence to this methodology. Um,
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. We haven't done any quantitative studies or quantitative research at this point. We've regularly asked people to fill out evaluations at the end of the workshop. We have now more than 100 of those evaluations. We have a couple of other people who are facilitating the workshop, so who have gone through a certification process with me. So they are also facilitating the workshop, and they have evaluations as well. And so it's only qualitative data that we have, but the qualitative data is unanimous in identifying real benefit to the process. In other words, most importantly, people have been able to get in touch with some aspect of their deep wisdom, to listen to their own inner voice.
Yeah, because you say in the beginning, your description says, this is a proven process for deep reflection on human change. It's based on the conviction that every person has the most important answers about direction, purpose, and calling within them. So this conviction that, conviction to me is a very strong, powerful word. It sort of implies that you have observed over time the same results that would lead you to call this a conviction, because you have seen this. So this is what you're talking about here. People have over and over again said this about this process.
That's correct. Yep.
I'm on a website right now for one of the locations that we regularly do this workshop at, and looking at some of the comments here. This is a transformative and informative workshop. Thank you for bringing a genuine sense of sharing and exploration to us. Another one, I got several really important ideas that will help facilitate my personal change. Thank you for holding space. Amazing environment for relaxed and alert learning. And when people set their own intention, and that's really where the whole process begins. What do I really want? And they find that intention by going into their own embodied experience. And it's almost impossible to fail, because if you have just the least little bit of willingness, you will learn. And then there are those amazing moments where somebody comes up to us after and just says, I came here, really doubtful and hesitant. I really didn't want to get out of bed this morning, but I came here and I'm so grateful that I spent this half a day or this full day with you, because I was really able to tap into my own, as a newfound wisdom.
And we have a couple of experiences where someone has come up to us and said, oh, by the way, next month we're moving to California. This is somebody who was in Duluth, Minnesota, because we took, after we took the workshop, we sat down and we really talked about what we want out of our life. And, we've been thinking about this for a while, but the workshop really helped us make this huge decision in our lives, and we're moving, and we're just amazing. Another wonderful gentleman was interested in exploring his own business, and he made the decision to do it after he took the workshop. So we have a few of these examples where people made really significant transformations in their life. We don't say because of the workshop, but the workshop provided them an opportunity to listen in a deeper way to their own inner calling.
Mm.
And Dr. Gary's actually being modest here, Christiana, to the gentleman who moved to California is a composer, and he went there because of the film industry. And a film that he worked on is nominated for an Oscar this year. So,
Well, heavens. That is some strong labyrinth energy right there. Oh,
I think
all
so too.
righty. That's fabulous. Okay, so I love hearing success stories, and I love hearing because for me, from a labyrinth perspective, the labyrinth as a safe container is really what you are. You are holding space in with a design that's already acknowledged as a safe container for people to explore this. And so this is another wonderful example of how a very important and valuable process is created in something that has been done for hundreds of years. That this is what this labyrinth has been used for. This design, this archetype is used as a safe container. And
so sometimes Christianity, we say this is a dangerously safe container. It's paradoxical, right?
well,
It
that
is
was
a safe container, but at the same time, you might encounter new possibilities for yourself that are even surprising to you. You might get in touch with a deep longing that you haven't really listened to before. So it's safe, and because of its safety, it provides that opportunity to really listen to what you maybe have been blocking out, that you've put roadblocks in the way of in your life.
Yes, and I was just going to point to that this process that you've created helps people get in touch with the fact that walking our life paths isn't easy. And walking the labyrinth brings up stuff, even if you aren't in a class like this. And very often people stop walking because has brought up stuff and they don't know how to handle it, even within the safe container. And so having a class like this that helps guide people and channel this and keeps people embodied as they go through this is so incredible, especially nowadays. And I have to ask this because you've pointed to all the positive results, but what happens when our people are dealing with unexpected or unwanted change? And they've come, or stuff comes up for them that is really um, very confronting for them in one of the quadrants. How do you help them? How do it can bring up a lot of physical, emotional, psychological memories, mental issues. How do you help them through this? How do you facilitate if that's something like that happens?
Yeah, I think one of the keys in the Mountain 10 process is that as we are leading it now, we are in community. So we sort of come together into community. We do the Mountain 10 process, the labyrinth process, and then often it's in that in the clearness part of the workshop where we're in smaller groups where we get to each of the participants has an allotted time where they get to share about their own journey, and they are respectfully listened to by the other people in their triad, say, and then they are asked open-ended questions. So there's, we really emphasize that we're not here to give advice and we're not here to fix things, but really to be in community, in dangerously safe space, where we can witness for each other. Um, and it is challenging. And but we come into the labyrinth. Our every day, are we in our lives, if we imagine that our every day is a labyrinth, and we choose how to walk it. Do we walk it awake and alert, or do we walk it with our eyes down and not paying attention and trying to shut out everything else around us? So we come into this workshop as who we are. um, and we also have the opportunity, to the best of our ability, to set an intention and to see how I call it the universe, or the multiverse even, supports us in our learning process.
In those small triads, in the clearness process, we often say, your primary goal here is simply to hold each other in unconditional love, without judgment. We're at different places on our journey. Each of our journeys looks different. We're not here to fix or recommend or tell our own story, but each of us is here just to hold that other individual in the fullness of who they are, in whatever is going on in their journey. And sometimes this triad process only is 15 minutes for each person. But that 15 minutes of being held, of being listened to in the deepest kind of respectful attention, is identified by participants as a key element of not only this experience, but sometimes they will talk about this in terms of what a wonderful experience that was, even if it's a brief period of time. So we're not trying to, we really don't provide any kind of therapeutic follow-up or anything like that, but we're creating the space where, as we know, the labyrinth can help us move more fully into our own inner wisdom, and a place where there is a loving, non-judgmental community where we can do our work. And other people are doing their work as well, and that gives us an inspiration and permission to do our own work.
Yeah, I love that the second aspect, the whole clearing process, the clearness process, because I know personally when I'm a long time workshop taker, that I get more out of what other people say about their process than I have about my own. Or if I have a little obstacle or blinders on in one area, often I'm in the exact right group, and this one person is talking, and he or she says exactly what I needed to hear to clear that up and help me go forward. So I just think it's so valuable to have that piece to this methodology that you've created. I can see how helpful it probably is for everyone.
Yes.
And so the other thing that I really am so excited about with this, and so this sort of leads into my next session, is the melding that you've done of the Eastern, more intuitive processes of mindfulness, or bringing awareness of energy up through the chakra systems, and combining that with a more Western approach of where do you want to go, what is that you need, that kind of that kind of the climbing the mountain process, and using these together to me makes so much sense nowadays, because it's so it's so inclusive. It doesn't polarize. It doesn't say, "Oh, I'm holistic and you're allopathic and I don't want to deal with you." It blends these things. It's an inclusive methodology that you've created here, to me.
Right, and I mean, we hope even that it's integrative. That it facilitates a fuller integration of all of the dimensions of who we are. Eastern, Western, rational, spiritual, heart, values, mental processes, physical awareness, all of who we are, and all of who we as a human community are. Right. That's what we're continuing to discover in all of our realization of the fullness of diversity and the richness of diverse traditions. We're beginning to understand the fullness of who we are as a human community, which reflects our diversity as an individual. And we hope that this process allows a deeper integration, facilitates a deeper integration of all of those dimensions. Yeah.
And so you mentioned you mentioned before about you have people who have been trained in this process. So you offer trainings?
I do, yes. Mm-hmm.
Ah.
And that's happens on a very individual basis. So I usually work with a person over the course of a couple of months. We have some day-long training, but also some reflection over time. And before people do their first group, they meet by conference call. After they do their first group, we have a sort of opportunity to reflect on what went well, what are you learning, and how do we continue that process. So,
because this methodology, this process, could be applied to any area.
yes,
I mean,
yes,
people with ADHD, people with LGBTQ community, anything you can think of, academic, education, health, it can really, it transcends any, labels, because it is about the human condition. It's really about the bigger picture, while
that's right.
while making it very, very personal.
Right. Yep. Maybe a way to wrap things up would be with a poem. Do you think that would be okay?
Oh, that would be lovely, Dr. Gary. Yes. Go.
So
Yes.
this is a poem from my most recent collection of poetry, Naming Rights, and it's called Give Yourself. Give yourself to the path, to each step, each word, each moment, each small mercy, each held hand, each meeting of the eyes. Give yourself, and the way will find you and guide you. You may do your planning, your careful calculations, balance the checkbook and pay the bills and park between the lines. But when the time comes for dancing, listen to the wind. Turn and turn as the music beckons, as the path lures you. Sink to your knees in the center of your calling, your wounds and all your wild longings. Speak the question at the center of your wisdom. Breathe in the betrayals and the chains. Forgive yourself again, and then stand in the center, all the bold tree of you. Stand at the center of the world. Be anointed, be chosen again for the only work large enough for your heart, for your wonder and your wandering. be chosen again to live in that fierce question that sets your heart on fire.
Wow. That is brilliant. Oh my golly. Thank you so much for sharing that. I, I don't know. Have you published anything in Labyrinth Pathways or Cardroya? You had
Yes,
any?
yes.
Okay.
In fact, I think,
That one
I think
was?
that poem, I think, is in the most recent Labyrinth Pathways. Yeah.
Oh, good, 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 good. I'm
Yeah.
reminding people, listen, if you're a member, go and read this again. It is worth rereading and rereading. Thank you so much. It just spectacular. Really beautiful. Thank you so very much. We didn't have anybody come on to ask questions. So, and we are just at 2:00 or my time. Yes, our time, 2:01. Do you have just one quick final question? Do you have any vision for what do you see? Do you see this process as being something that will be important in academia and health fields in the next 20 years? Or how do you see labyrinths um, working and in a positive way?
Well, as you alluded to, I think there are so many ways in which labyrinths in general and the Mountain 10 process, frankly, might be very, very helpful to people in learning environments to help them learn in a more embodied, fuller, integrative way. And that is also true of health, right? We're beginning to realize even more fully that health is a holistic thing, that it isn't just about our bodies, it's about our minds, it's about our spirits. And when we can bring all of that together, we have the opportunity for a wholer and deeper sense of health and learning.
Yeah.
So I think labyrinth technologies are going to expand and become more and more important. I've used labyrinths more and more in my own learning situations, so both in undergraduate and graduate classes. Um, and I'm finding that people are hungry for the opportunities that labyrinth provide for deep reflection and listening to deep inner wisdom.
Hmm. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Gary and Gary. It's really been such a pleasure sharing this hour with you. I am so privileged to do this work and meet people like you who are making such a difference. And it's really a pebble in the pond effect. I really sense this, especially with this episode today. It's just going to reverberate outward. And so, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Christiana, for doing this powerful, important work. I really appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share about this process and to feel your excitement, Christiana. So thank you.
Well, many continued blessings on your path, and I will be in touch with you. I have lots of other questions personally that I want to ask you. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So you've been listening to the Labyrinth Society's Many Paths, Many Visions on GoToMeeting and broadcast by Spreaker with your host, Christiana Brinton. Be sure to check the TLS website, resources media area, Facebook page, and global group, and YouTube for a list of upcoming dates and guests. Also, if this podcast has piqued your interest in the Labyrinth Society and you'd like more information about membership, please go to www.labyrinthsociety.org/membership. Many blessings to all, and may you find what you need on your path through life.